So today I want to talk. I want to do a tilt talk. I've named it the tilt talk. Someone suggested that I do a talk on tilt. Um, so I will try my best to talk about it, how I think you can manage it and work on it and try and improve and get better. Um, and yeah, let's go from there. So we're gonna call this the tilt talk. Tilt talk. Here, that could have been better. So I'll talk both sort of like mainly the player's POV, right? I'm gonna mainly talk about like in player perspective. I might bring a little bit of staff if it's like scrim and organized stuff, right? But it's mainly gonna be the player POV. Okay. So when you think of like tilt stuff, right? The first few things I immediately think of, I think just hard tilting, right? Which everyone sort of knows what that is. I think of being passive aggressive. Just like passive aggro. Tone, the tone of voice, someone's like really stern and like like being like a little bit more annoying, right? Or like not annoying, but like really like judgmental or like overbearing, right? And then sort of confidence, and like that's a completely different thing. Where confidence is sort of its own thing, right? So you'd sort of like put these sort of like together, and you'd sort of put confidence on a little different thing, this thing. And I want to bring in confidence because I think it's like also something something sort of important. Why do I want to? I don't need to save. Okay. So now let's first talk about it. Now, if hopefully you're watching this, hopefully you're someone who wants to try and learn about this stuff and try and like understand how to solve it and how to fix things, right? Or yeah, you're like hopefully you're someone who maybe deals with these problems, right, and like wants to work on it. Maybe you know people who do, and you're just trying to educate yourself about the topic. But the biggest thing, right, that I'll say straight off the bat, right, is do you recognize that you have an issue with this? Because the first step, right, in all honesty, is to like say like, hey, that team fight, I was actually a little bit mean, like I shouldn't have said that, right? So do you recognize there are problems, like, or like, I'm not gonna say there are problems, but like, do you recognize you tilt? You recognize you tilt? Okay. With like something above here, or again, confidence. And next thing, right, is like I've worked with a lot of players, right, and almost all of them will say like, I want to fix this. This is a problem, right? Like I don't like that I do this. It just sort of comes out, and I want to fix it, but it's really hard because it's it comes naturally, and like I want to work on it, right? But the biggest thing you have to ask, right, is like yourself, or like if you're a staff member, is like, does the player want to fix it? Right? And if that's a yes, right, awesome. Like I literally, let's work hard. Like as an individual, tapping to you, work your hardest to try and fix it. As staff, have maybe staff try and help you, right? And then the other thing is if it's a no, right? So if it's like a yes, great, like awesome, cool, like smiley face, right? If it's like a no, right? Well, if you're on a scrim team, right, then like I mean the question is, if it's a staff decision or staff run team, it's like how bad is it? Do you have other options? Do you have time, right? Is what's your team environment? Are you fine with that, right? Is your roster defined by players or the staff decisions? Like you think can it be minimized, right? I'm not gonna go too much into that, right? But if you yourself, as an individual don't want to fix it, well, I don't know. uh, trying, that's hard, a little bit harder to deal with, right? But the way I look at it, right, is normally when you're running into this, okay, is I'd say that the first three things like I talk about are normally the biggest problems, right? Like tilting, being passive aggressive, and tone. And it comes from these two things, I'd say. It comes from either being mad at yourself about something you did, right? Or the team, right? Something maybe your player, your Lucio decided to like fat finger beat for like absolutely no reason, or your Lucio decided to speed boost off the map, right? You're just like, what is that guy doing, right? You get like really annoyed. He's done it like 3 times, and it's like this guy throwing like, so, or maybe you're mad at yourself because you've messed up your ultimate like 3 times, and like you're supposed to be working on your ultimate, and like it's just frustrating you, right? So like it comes, these are like the two main concepts, right, that would sort of come from. And like I can break these down more into what sort of leads you to do, right? Maybe it leads you to just being quiet. Like now all of a sudden, like after you do a lot, you just stop calming as much and you're quiet. Maybe it come you're mad at yourself, but it comes off as like you're mad at the team, or it somehow like affects the team environment. I can say it that way, right? Or maybe you start over microing the team. And what I mean by microing is you start telling people how to play their hero, like hardcore, like more than you normally do, right? Because, and I can define that a bit more, maybe because you don't like trust them to do their roles, right? They're making so many mistakes, so you just don't trust them anymore. Like, dude, are you sure you're gonna like beat that grab? Like, make sure to beat that grab. Make sure you hide from EMP and beat the EMP, right? Or maybe it's honestly coming from a positive thing where you just want to win. Like you want to win so bad that you're gonna like tell other people, what to do, right? You want to win so bad, right? And like when you're over microing, right, it can be passive aggressive, right? You can obviously have not great tone with it, and it can happen, right? I'm gonna bring up a quote here that I think really applies, and I really like this quote. A while ago, I DM'd like multiple OWL head coaches, and I sort of asked them, when you're picking players, what's something you look at? And a lot of people talk about mechanics, talked about play style, talked about what they want in a team, like a little bit, like they didn't give me all the the juicy deets, right? But I DM'd Supreme, who's like the head coach of Washington Justice. And he said something that literally I think will always stand with me. I will never forget this. This line is like it is so good. So what he said is, when I pick a player, mind, attitude, personality are really important. The desire to win, which breaks the team's mood, is not a desire to win. It's just a lot of anger, right? And like that sort of comes into this over microing thing, right? If you're over microing, right, and it's breaking the team's mood, that's that's not good, right? Like you're trying to win so bad, but it's breaking the team's mood, right? That's not really the desire to win, right? So I hopefully that makes sense, but I think that's a very good example of what people think, right, and like what it's actually doing in reality. And I always think this is hard to deal with, and I it's hard to fix this, and I have some potential solutions that'll hopefully help. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so you were over here. So you did quiet, you're mad at yourself, over microing, right? The next one I'd say is, you notice someone making dumb mistakes. Right, like I said, maybe you just had literally like a VOD review on the topic as a team, and the person just messing it up, right? Like, and it's like, we just talked about this. Why is this guy messing it up, right? Like, that's something that can probably annoy you, right? Or something that I think is also like, definitely something that really happens a lot, right? You feel, someone on your team isn't listening to you. This can be very frustrating as someone who's an IGL, and I'm like trying to IGL, and like my team's not even listening to my alt tracking, they're just talking over me. It can be very demoralizing, and make you not want to do it and make you really quiet, right? And it sucks for sure. It doesn't mean you don't really start alt tracking, but it's definitely something that I'd say is demoralizing. And then, again, we'll talk about how to fix it, right? And like a little bit more detail will go in on that is why do you think they're not listening to you, or why could that not happen? And it could be a few things, right? Like it could be that not that they don't want to listen to you, right? It could be that like they can't do like what they can't do what you're saying. Like it's just not physically possible. Like let's say like you're saying grab him. I want to grab really early, and like your Zarya is like looking at a D.Va whose D.Va is just like staring them with like beady eyes, and just wants to like DM the grab, and your Zarya is like I want to listen to what you're saying, dude, but like Zarya is giving me the stare, so I can't do it, right? So and because of that, like they can't do it. They don't want to counter call. They don't want to counter call. My handwriting, or clutter comms, because it will, clutter comms a bit more. Right? The other thing, right, that it could definitely be is they just don't agree with what you're saying. They don't agree with what you're saying. And that happens, right? And like the way to fix this, very simply, I tell this to almost all the teams I work with. I hope if you're a player and you're scrimming, you have a notebook next to you, right? And if someone says something you don't agree with, make sure you take down where that happened, right? And talk about it later so you can fix it, right? Take notes because it's a macro discussion. If you don't agree about something, right, and someone's making a play and making a call, right, talk about it. Literally go and talk about it after, because otherwise you just won't resolve it. Okay. And the last thing, which happens too, is they actually they just can't hear you. Maybe the comms are like so cluttered, right? Like, but they actually just can't hear you. That happens too, right? So, these are like what actually normally happens if someone says, I feel like my team is not listening to me, right? Well, normally it's not because they don't care, right? And it's very like, and I'd probably say it's like 10% of the case that, that's actually why they're not listening to you. It's normally because they don't agree with what you're saying because of some macro discussion. They can't do what you're just saying, and how your comm structure maybe doesn't allow them to, say something like, I can't do that because it clutters too much, or, it becomes too rough. So you sort of like trust that they can't do it. Or they just can't hear you because maybe your comms are too cluttered. Okay. So in general, right, now we'll sort of summarize this, right? In general, what ends up happening, right, is when people like tilt, passive aggressive, or like a tone comes into play, it comes from underperforming. Or communication. People very rarely tilt when you're hard winning, right? When you're winning, people normally don't tilt. People don't get passive aggressive. If it does, that's interesting. I mean, could still happen, I guess. But like, it normally happens, when you're underperforming and losing. So people want to try and win more because game's about winning. It's competitive, right? Or there's still like communication that's like really bad, and like people aren't listening, or someone's quiet, and that can affect people. Okay. So now let's get into the topic of how can we fix things, right? Like, how can we actually go about trying to fix this stuff? So let's talk about that. Let's get another color here. Let's do blue. Fix. Fixing. So at a very high level, these are sort of the ways that, in my opinion, you can go about fixing things. Okay. There might be more, there might be less. This may or may not work for you. I hope it does, or it helps, like, make it like less. But hopefully this will help. Hopefully, right? So the first thing, okay, and this is the first thing I'm gonna say, and it's super, super, super important. Something that I tell almost everyone I talk to. Okay, you have to be okay with mistakes. Okay, you have to be okay with mistakes. You will make mistakes. Mistakes will happen. You give me, if anyone sees this in comments and just gives me an owl match, I'm not gonna do it for every single comment if people spam comments, but if you give me an owl match, I guarantee you I could find a mistake, and probably multiple mistakes. I could probably find a mistake from every single player on the team. Okay, mistakes happen. Owl matches, contenders, comp, they happen. There's nothing you can do to prevent mistakes. And I know it sucks being a perfectionist, right? But it's real, like, mistakes happen, right? It's just something that happens. So what is important to understand from this, and this is where I think people don't fully get, right, is when a mistake happens, you can use that to your advantage sometimes. Sometimes, right? Oh, whoops. You can tie and use that to your advantage. Now, how, you might say? Well, let's say your D.Va just decides to just fly into the enemy team for no reason. I have this because I saw this in Owl once. I'm not going to say what team, but your D.Va just flies into the enemy team for like no reason, okay? And just ints and just dies, right? As a team, you can be like, dude, this guy, like, what is this guy doing in comms? Or you can say, like, this guy's throwing, like this guy sucks, right? And the team can be like, I'm sorry, it's my bad, like, and apologize, right? And whatnot. You guys, like, and the team's like, okay, yeah, it's fine, right? But instead, you can be like, okay, our D.Va pushed really aggressively, right? Like, really aggressively. You could immediately say, okay, they're distracted by our D.Va pushing in. Let's take maybe a more aggressive position, or maybe look for a trade and kill someone else while they're all looking at our D.Va, or maybe set up something, right? So maybe you can look to set up, because it's a distraction. You can maybe look for a trade, kill. You can maybe look to, get some valuable, positioning or something, right? Set up positioning, sort of the same. Depends on sort of how you look at it, right? But you can sort of set up for a plan. Oh, unlucky. Okay, well, we will keep going, but it'll be a little longer than 15 minutes, I guess. Unlucky. I will answer questions at the end because I think questions are very important in this one. Okay. Where am I? Sorry. So yeah, so sort of like, mistakes happen, right? It's okay if it happens, right? Don't freak out, right? If a mistake happens, right? Can you get something out of it? Can you look for a trade? Can you set up? Can you do something, right? If it happens, right? The next thing that's even more important is teams that make mistakes sometimes don't restabilize. They fall apart. Like, let's say on your Kings Row defense, right? You like someone just dies to a Hanzo headshot, and then all of a sudden you guys just make another mistake after that, and then another mistake, and then all of a sudden you just got rolled all of Kings Row first and second, and maybe third, right? When a mistake happens, it's even more important. Like if you're not able to do that trade thing, the next fight you just reset. It's okay, it happens. You have a more level-headed fight the next fight, because if you keep making mistakes, that's going to lead to a problem, right? So it's important that level-headed. It's okay, right? Again, you've got to have this mentality that it's okay to make mistakes. If you need to like put that on a poster somewhere, you could do that, but you need to sort of be able to turn it around. Okay. The next thing, right, is you could get like the next thing, like this mistakes. The next thing is literally very happens a lot. Is you could just get straight up. Whoops, number two. You can get frustrated or annoyed about something, right? Like you could get frustrated, annoyed at your teammates for like inting. You get frustrated because someone's not listening to you, right? Like it again, like that happens, right? It's totally viable. People get frustrated. People get annoyed. All I'm going to say to this, right, is that you need to sort of reset. Whoops, I did the wrong thing here. You still need to have this concept of resetting, right? And obviously the biggest thing about this is you need to be able to identify when it happens, right? Some people will just tunnel and not even notice it, and that's something that is a skill you're gonna have to like pick up. Maybe your teammates can be like to have a keyword for something that happens maybe, and they'll help you like know when it's happening because you don't realize it yourself. Eventually, I think if you keep focusing on this, you should be able to figure it out yourself. And you'll watch more how you talk, and you'll talk a little bit less, and you'll be more aware of what you're doing. But the biggest thing I'd say, right, is I'm not going to write this whole thing out, but the one way of going about this is relax your mind. Normally, when you get frustrated and annoyed, there's a billion things going on in your head, right? Like if you're an IGL, I can tell you, if there's someone who is an ex-IGL, you're thinking a lot. There's no way that you're thinking a lot. You're thinking deeply. You're thinking about how you want to take the next fight, how you think they're going to take the next fight, right? So just relax your mind, right? Take a few seconds to not think, right? Or as deeply, right? Like hopefully you're not the main support, right? Or the IGL. Because if you are, you could still do this. You probably still need to talk, right? But like, try and be a little less about it. And instead of this, you could maybe like listen if this is like in between, a game like round or something. So you could listen. If it's between maps, right? Then you could just, chill, just, silence, sort of just, chill. Another way of going is I'm not the biggest, this thing for like meditation and all that stuff, right? Let me charge my headset before it dies. But doing breathing. One second. Doing breathing, right, can actually really help like relax you. For some people, right? Like just doing like breathing 3, 2, 1. It's through your nose, then holding it, then after that, essentially, breathing out, right? And what I'll say again, emphasize this, a lot. Some of this stuff isn't for everyone.
Greetings.
Some of this stuff will work for some people. Some of it won't work for some people, right? Some other weird stuff might work for other people, right? So it depends. Everyone's different, right? But these are hopefully some things that'll help you, right? The next thing, right? I think it's really good. Maybe it's just getting up and getting water, right? Walking around might help. My handwriting's getting actually worse. Or the biggest thing that I really think helps is like water on your face. I think water on your face, like for example, like nothing is going right, you're getting hard rolled, right? And your every confidence is down, everything is just in the slump, right? You just go and you put water on your face, like like in my opinion, you just feel fresh, like everything just like goes back, right? And some of these things I'll add, right, is like these are things that don't happen mid game, right? Like this type of stuff. I mean, you could try and do it really fast between mid game, but it's stuff that you maybe do like in between maps, right? Or maybe like in between a round really fast. But so it's still hard, right? Like mid game fixes are even harder. But you still have the first point where you can do that, right? Where you sort of try and relax your mind and sort of just listen instead of think more. One other thing I think is really helpful, and I think in especially a competitive environment where you have scrims, is what I like to call sort of just like at the end of scrims, like actually talk. It's something I do try and tell my teams to do that I would work with, which is basically at the end of a scrim block, essentially everyone just say what you think went good. Like as an individual, you like go down a list from the team, like say like, hey, I think macro wise we did this really well. I think I did this individually well. I think I could have done this worse. And then they can talk about what the team did bad, right? Like I think we still need to work on this. Reinhardt, I think you sort of fed here, right? But it's constructive criticism. It's supposed to be nice and productive to like hopefully improve everyone. But the why this is good is because this allows you to like get your sort of like feelings out and like in a tolerable way where people can have a proper discussion that's like mediated by hopefully staff or like a team captain, right? So people can essentially like if they have some problem or some issue, right, it can be brought up. If it's a really sensitive issue, you can do it privately, right? But it can be brought up earlier, preferably, so that it doesn't become like worse. Because if you have a problem with something, right, and you just never bring it up, and it just keeps happening and keeps happening and keeps happening, it becomes a massive problem. I like relate this to like a cut, right? You have a very small cut on your hand for some reason, right, and you just don't like bring it up or something, right, and like you don't heal it, it can become like infected and become like a really big big issue. So that's sort of one way you can go about it. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about confidence really fast. So confidence is a little different, right? And I think the biggest thing that confidence, right? And like where does confidence come from, right? Is confidence sort of comes from, in my opinion, it comes from repetition. It comes from being on, doing the same what you're trying to do multiple times. The point it feels natural, right? Like that's confidence. So what I think helps with confidence, as weird as it sounds, like if you're in a competitive team, like doing it a lot. So sometimes scrims isn't enough, but sometimes playing comp enough and like getting more comfortable with the hero just because you've played it more. For example, I'm not confident in ball. I barely play ball. I've maybe played a total of like 10 hours of ball, right? But I understand the macro comp. Like I understand how macro ball works. I understand the micro concepts, right? But like if I were to go play ball, I wouldn't be confident in it because I don't have a lot of play time in it, right? So obviously, like playing it a lot and getting used to it will make you feel more, comfortable and confident in it. The other thing that also, honestly, makes you confident is actually, in all honesty, like other people. If someone else says, "Oh, dude, your ball was really good today," right? Like that uplifts you. You're like, "Oh, wow, okay." He's like, the work I'm doing is paying off, right? So, having maybe like other people, like, like ask, like, you think I'm doing good, like doing better? Am I doing worse, right? And like, hopefully, let's be honest with you. It's like, I think you're doing much better, but you still need to work on this, right? And that like brings up your confidence. And obviously, if it comes from teammates, it's even better because you feel like your teammates then are, noticing that you're working harder and they notice that you're trying. So that can definitely boost morale, right? And this sort of leads into the topic of like, if someone's, tilting or not being confident in scrims, right? Like, how can your teammates help? Well, your teammates can easily help by saying, it's okay, don't worry, but don't worry about that. Like, it happens. You can turn it around next map, right? Or like saying to your Sombra, like, don't worry about that EMP. It happens. You've had so many other good EMPs, right? If like the person's really quiet and like really like, like, oh man, dude, like, why did this happen again, right? Or what you could do also in a sort of like another way of sort of like raising their confidence or like making them like not as quiet or something, you could say like the next maybe the next EMP they do, and it's like a really good EMP, they normally do good EMPs, you'd be like that, hey, that was a great EMP, right? Like good job, right? And like they could feel a more sense of like, oh wow, yeah, thank you, like that's good. But yeah, so that's sort of a summary, right, of like the tilt talk. I don't know, the name's interesting, but so hopefully that should hopefully help, right? Feel free to add comments in YouTube. I can try and help as much as I can. Again, the biggest thing with this is everyone's different, right? Dealing with this is not necessarily easy. I've worked with players and I've like minimized stuff. I've helped like stop people from like tension and stuff. But I'd say the biggest thing, right, in all honesty, that fixes a lot is like these three things, and I forgot to do the I'll add the other one over here, but sort of like the after scrim thing. Whoops. Number three is like the after scrim, whoops, like sort of like talk, right? And it just it's really productive because everyone sort of like understands how everyone else feels, and maybe someone else feels the same way you do, and like you guys can like fix the problem together, right? Yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this.